Hey, everybody. Welcome to the July 2020 edition of Dinner with the Devs with Schell Games. I'm Dwayne Waite, part of the Schell Games marketing team. I am very excited to talk about today's topic, accessibility in games. It's been a hot trend recently in the gaming industry, and Schell Games is doing a lot to make sure that all of our experiences, especially our VR experiences, are accessible to players from all backgrounds and abilities. So we have a nice cast of people to talk about the studio priority, how we're approaching accessibility, and we'll get a chance to define what we mean by accessibility and how we add that to the game design and development. But before we get started, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the Schell Games YouTube, make sure you do so, and make sure you can follow all of our social media as well. We'll talk more about that at the end of the video. If you have any questions, there is a live chat moderator. Put in your comments, your questions there. We'll be sure to answer whatever questions, comments that you have about our games, about our studio, and things of that nature. And yeah, I guess we'll get started. So one of the big questions that we're going to answer is, why should accessibility in games matter to you? And should games make accessibility a priority? Should games be accessible to as many people as possible? So we'll try to cover those two questions. But before we answer that question, let's introduce our panel. And so we'll go with Harley first, then Alexis, and then Francisco.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. My name is Harley Baldwin. I am the VP of Design here at Schell Games. So my job is to make sure that all of our projects are staffed with the right designers and that the designers have the right support in growing their skills and their careers, and that all of the products that we ship are at the highest possible quality that they could be. And accessibility is a big part of that. So I'm excited to talk about this today.
Hello, my name is Alexis Miller, and I'm the Director of Product Management at Schell Games. I'm excited that I get to work on multiple VR titles at Schell, and that accessibility has been a recent topic that I've been working on here. So excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, and I am Francisco Suki. I've been at Schell for 10 years designing games, a lot of physical location-based games and a lot of VR games as well, among other things. And when it comes to accessibility, I would be with the team making the game, doing the best we can to plan for our games to be accessible and to test that our games are actually accessible.
Excellent. And so let's dive right into that. And I'll start with you, Francisco. Whenever we talk about accessibility and games being accessible, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, as a developer, to me, it means having as many people possible playing our game and enjoying our game to the extent that we can, and to the extent that we can, the extent that the game can still be the game and still be developed with the resources that we have, and maximizing and opening up the breadth of diversity and different people that can enjoy the game.
Very cool. And please, yeah, I know some of you are new to our Dinner with the Devs, so if you have any questions or comments to fill in the answers, please feel free to jump in. So, Harley, so the accessibility has become a studio priority. Why is that the case?
Well, Schell Games has a long history of being family friendly, and so in some ways, because of that, because a lot of the stuff that we do is family friendly, accessibility is baked in, right? Because if you're family friendly, families includes 4-year-olds that may not be able to read, for example. So that's a little bit of a part of it, but also one of the things that because we're an indie studio, one of the things that we like to do when we think about our own original IP is we like to think about where are there spots in the games verse where there isn't a lot of coverage, where we could make a splash, right? And so if you think about the way that we originally thought about, let's take, for example, I Expect You to Die, which is done very well for us as an original IP, it was originally conceived as a way to solve an accessibility problem in VR, in that in early VR, moving in the environment made people very, very sick. And so we thought, well, that's probably not a great way to sell games. If people put on the headset and play your game and start associating your game with nausea, not really going to get great reviews. But if we could maybe take that central problem of virtual movement in VR and say, what would a game be like that wasn't based on virtual movement, that was based on what VR is good at, making a sense of place, giving you objects to interact with. And so that very first big original IP idea was based in accessibility. And so once we released the first I Expect You to Die game, we kind of looked at each other and realized, oh, this is a thing that provides real opportunities for the company. It provides real opportunities to get games to people that might not otherwise play them. It provides opportunities for us to explore things that other companies might not be exploring. And if we're going to do that, we need to do it with some intentionality and some due diligence. So Jesse Schell, who is the CEO and founder of the company, asked me to put together some accessibility guidelines. We started by doing an enormous amount of research. We had a lot of guidelines that people could look at. And over time, we've been refining those guidelines to really hyper useful matrix, which Alexis put together, that's been really, really valuable for our teams, whether they be original IP or partner projects, to help our partners also choose what kind of accessibility options they want to think through.
Cool. So Alexis, Harley mentioned that you helped put together that spreadsheet, or you put together that spreadsheet with the amount of research. So what type of things are on that spreadsheet in terms of making games accessible?
Yeah, so the goal with creating what I call the accessibility matrix, which is a little sexier than spreadsheet, is, as Harley said, there was a ton of research done within Schell Games around accessibility. And so I tried to put that into a format that would be useful on a daily basis. So it categorizes things at a high level. So thinking about accessibility, like comfort, and comfort could mean different things in terms of physical comfort as well as psychological, like around the content. And so we have categories at the high level, and then within each category, there's a smaller set of what I call goals. And so the goals are centered around things like, people with sensitivity to bright lights are able to comfortably play the game. So the way it works is that we've had a couple of projects started to use it, where in the pre-production phase, they're thinking about these accessibility goals before they've completed the project, which is kind of a big deal, right? So thinking about, going through each thing, figuring out, is this applicable to our game, A, and B, if it is, let's brainstorm some solutions now, because it's a lot easier to think about now and kind of plan that into the budget and the scope. So that's kind of the general overview of the accessibility matrix, and still a work in progress, but I think that it has been a valuable tool so far.
Good deal. So we have a question from Sycoticdog, who says, when you say accessible, do you mean physically accessible or accessible to people of color and non-cis gender people. And I would probably say all of the above, but I'll let my experts tackle that.
I mean,
I mean,
I would
from my perspective,
say,
that's where the matrix comes in, right? The matrix helps you choose what's important for the game, um, which was it was the key that we were missing when we were just looking at a giant pile of accessibility options.
yeah, and certainly in our context, so within our matrix, all those things that were mentioned are part of that. So diversity of gender, race, background, ethnicity, et cetera, is considered a part of our accessibility goals.
Yeah, and I know one of our non-VR experiences, Mission is Complicated, which is free that you can download, does tackle a lot of those issues in terms of peoples of color, non-cisgender people. So yeah, I think that we've been doing we could always do better, but we've been doing a really good job trying to get as many uh, different players and showcasing different backgrounds of people. So very cool. So let's jump into. So I have a question about what current gaps are in accessibility in VR games, but we can expand that to just gaps of accessibility in the games industry. And again, I know Francisco, you've been designing, VR, non-VR, LBE experiences for quite a while. So I'll start with you in terms of accessibility in games. What gaps do you see uh, generally that the industry should consider?
Yeah, that's
And
a
then
really good question.
big question. So
Yeah.
you can take don't have to speak for the industry. Just what you.
Yeah. No, I see. No, I see them. I'm getting the harder ones. It's okay. Uh, no, I think I can speak a little bit about how I've seen it change, and then maybe we can extrapolate a little bit based on
That's good.
that, as like where it might be going too, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember, I mean, we all remember, not long ago at all, having difficulty settings in a game could be considered like, no, that's not the way my game is meant to be played. My game is meant to be a really hard game, and so I'm not even going to have a normal mode. I'm not even going to have an easy mode, um, because the purity of the experience is that this must be an experience where you have a great challenge and you suffer and you can't get through it, then you don't deserve to play this game, right? Um, and we've seen those same people making those types of games all of a sudden like come out with a wealth of accessibility settings, and so there's been certainly like a big at least the start of a big change in terms of accessibility features. They start being covered in game reviews much more. They start being called out by people who analyze games, who do like deeper game thinking, critical thinking about game mechanics. And so uh, one thing that I will say is that as a game developer, seeing the game reviewers start to call that stuff out more and more helps and sinks in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard for me to gauge the gaps, because I am in many ways the demographic that games are made for, right? So I grew up playing games. I am super games literate. I have a full range of motion, and I have like I align with the classic gamer demographic. I have a beard, and so um, it is somewhat. I mean, it's very tragic. I think that you don't notice it. You don't notice what's missing if nothing's missing for you, right?
Sure.
But you do notice if you're paying attention how many more people are joining the conversation now that weren't joining the conversation before, because all of a sudden the games that are being made are like they are being considered now in the games that are being made, right? So we are seeing much more diverse cast of characters in games. We're seeing options for difficulty setting. We're seeing all sorts of social topics make their ways into games, into the game's stories, woven into the fabric of the game, which is, I think, the most powerful way of integrating accessibility into your games. As to, I unfortunately don't have a ton of insight into like what's next and what's missing, right? I have the insight. I hate to like bring it back always to the matrix, but I have the insight of the first time I saw the accessibility matrix, and I went, whoa, there's way more here than I was aware of, and there is. Like my immediate instinct was we need to be looking at this as early as possible in the development process of a game so that we can get in at the entry level, right? And a big part of it was because there's a ton of stuff here that I don't see in games, or I haven't seen in games. I think the one that is probably really hard to tackle and that we have a real chance in VR to help with are everything that's related to and I'm probably not going to use the correct terminology, but to use of your mobile faculties, to dexterity, to body movement. I know that Xbox has done like wonderful work in terms of like creating an accessible controller that people can reconfigure in ways and reprogram in ways that fit their needs to interact with games and make games accessible. I want to live in a world where that stuff is not like a weird niche controller that no one knows about, but rather that like games are designed at the base level to be interactive with those types of input methods that can open the door to like all the body types, all the dexterity levels, all the motion faculties.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
There is a there's a lens that you can put on when you're doing your high concept for games that is very accessibility friendly, right? So as an example, with Until You Fall, you could look at Until You Fall's entire sort of high design in terms of the way it tells you where to put your sword to block, and it tells you where to hit the enemy for best effect in order to get a crit. You could look at that whole system as an accessibility system, right? Very few of us have actually done the work to become master swordsmen. But I know that when I play that game, I feel like a master swordsman because it is giving me the accessibility cues that I need to do that. And I think that's a really rich perspective that we can do if we don't go the second mile and then say, okay, well, let's make sure that as many people as possible can have that experience, even if they do have mobility challenges. It's sort of taking a step back from where we took a step forward. And as an example of some of the stuff that Francisco is talking about, that team, the Until You Fall team, looked early on at the question of doing combat sitting down and standing up, right? And they definitely had a sense that most people would want to be standing up, right? If you really want to feel like a master swordsman, that's a thing a lot of people are going to do, but that's not available for everybody. And so they put in a seated mode from almost the very beginning of development. If they hadn't done so, adding a seated mode afterwards probably would have been prohibitively expensive because the mechanics would have gotten away from where a seated mode was an easy enough thing to do. But because it was always there in the beginning, every choice that they made about mechanics, they also thought about, okay, well, how's that going to affect seated mode, right? It's those kinds of choices that our teams are making because they're looking at that matrix early on and saying, okay, these are the accessibility issues that are really important to us. These are the ones we're going to prioritize. And a lot of times they can serve those ideas, and they can serve those players simply by not adding some mechanic or construct that would exclude them in the first place, right? It's they're basically unasking the question of whether they need to make a special feature just by not adding a feature that excludes people because they kept it top of mind, if that makes sense.
Very cool.
I think
So,
one thing to add on to that, thinking about seeded mode, which I think Schell Games does really well in multiple games, offering a solid seeded experience, is, you know, accessibility is a fluid thing. So it's not just about, oh, this person needs accessibility features and this person doesn't. I mean, I could break my foot tomorrow and then I can't stand to play until you fall. So I need that seated mode. Or, you know, I'm pregnant and my back is killing me, so I need that seated mode. I mean, I'm not pregnant, by the way. That came off weird. But you get the idea. So I think that's something that's the first time I thought about that, like this could be a temporary state. Then it's like, oh, wow, then this helps even more people, right? So again, just something to think about along the topic of what does accessible mean? You know, who is this for? Who is it helping?
good stuff. And I just want to backtrack just a little bit. We threw around some terms that might be industry specific. So Harley, if you want to describe what OIP is, that would be good for.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. OIP is industry talk for original IP. It basically means a game concept that was born and developed in-house, and that in this case Schell Games, because that's the company we're talking about, owns and publishes for ourselves.
And then Alexis, you talked about adding the accessibility to pre-production meetings. So can you describe what pre-production means?
Yeah, it's sort of what I would call like the brainstorming phase, right? So it's super early on before the full concept of the game has really taken shape.
Perfect. Okay, thank you guys. Yeah, just want to make sure that we don't leave. Yeah, again, we want to make.
Thanks for calling us out.
Everybody needs to make sure that they can understand the terms that we are using. So back to the conversation. We talked about adding or thinking about accessibility early on in the process, because like you said, Harley, that if you're thinking about it later, it could be expensive. So with that in mind, Matthew from YouTube asks, how does considering accessibility affect the budget in production of a game? And anybody can take that.
So I'll just throw out an idea. I don't know if this is actually answering the question though. So I guess I would argue that what we've been trying to do recently with Schell is that it's just like another set of features. So when you design a game, there's always way more that you want to do than you have budget and scope and time to do. So if you're thinking about it earlier in the process, then it just becomes another feature, right? And so you're comparing it against other features. It's not like here's one list of game features that are not accessible. Here's another list of features that are accessible. So when they kind of more become part of the same conversation, then it makes it more likely that they're gonna get into the game.
Yeah. You know, every game has a finite budget, and for every feature and for every bit of content, you're making a prioritized list of the most important things that you can get in, and there's that list is always much longer than the things that you can afford to get in. the big sea change for us has been in making sure that that list includes accessibility features that are really important to the team and the company, right? It does affect the budget, but again, the earlier you know this is an important feature that you must support or that you really want to support, the more likely you are to identify other features, other systems, other content that that don't need to be retrofitted in order to make them accessible. The example I think is basically let's look at elevators, right? In the architecture accessibility world, if you are going to add an elevator to any building, it's at least $1 million. To an existing building. If you are going to include building an elevator into a building, it's much less expensive because you're able to build the building around that need in a way that, like, you don't have to worry about the structural supports. They're already included in the building in a way that support the rest of the floors anyway. And so that's essentially what we're trying to do, you know, and back to your point, Alexis, about the continuum of accessibility needs, Judy Heumann, who really has pioneered a lot of the disability advocacy that we're seeing take hold in this country, at least. I listened to a podcast with her on it that really gave me a lot of perspective. One of the things that she said was, who uses the elevators that are now required in new public buildings the most? Is it people in wheelchairs? Is it people on crutches? It is not. It is families with strollers, because, you know, but that is also absolutely, it's a transient need for an accessibility help that most families go through at some point, right? And that really made me realize that, well, you could build a one-story building, right? There are other ways to do that. Maybe you don't have the budget for a 4-story building with elevators, but you have the budget for a really nice one-story building with skylights. Sorry, this metaphor's gotten out of hand.
No. Oh, go ahead, Alexis.
I was just going to say, what that reminds me of is I've been working on trying to incorporate accessibility topics into our playtesting. And so one of the ways that we've done that is to basically ask anyone that signs up to playtest a couple of basic questions. And so at first, the way I worded it was like, you know, do you have any disabilities? If you do, like, what are they? And pretty much across the board, everyone that answered that survey was like, no, I don't have any disabilities. And so then I reworded it and I said, do you have any accessibility needs, or do you use accessibility settings when you're playing video games? And the answers totally changed. So, you know, a lot of people said things like, I like to use subtitles. So, you know, or a couple of people pointed out I wear glasses, which I'm sure if I'd asked them if they had a disability, it probably would have said no. Right. So it is a much wider population that uses accessibility features, whether it's elevators or curb cuts on sidewalks or subtitles in games.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, as a father to a young child, finding elevators in airports is wild. So that's just the thing. See, Paul from YouTube asks, comments and asks, great talk. Accessibility is super important, but can it cover a huge range of, a huge range of things? How can a smaller team manage to even get their head around it all?
Yeah. I can talk from a little bit the development and maybe cover the budget a little bit. I think this is all related.
Yeah.
You cannot hit it all You will, you will see the list of everything you could possibly do, and it will, yeah, it will scare you, and it will make it'll make you wish you could do everything for everyone. And unless you have a gigantic budget, you cannot. But what you can do by educating yourself as early as possible is make some design decisions early that lead to accessibility. So the classic old example is color blindness, right? Like when I started making games, a game that accounted for color blindness was rare, and a setting for color blindness and accessibility menu was rare. Um, and being colorblind myself, I would just look at an artist's screen and say, I cannot tell the difference between these two things. I mean, we just change them. And so it was easy for me to make games that um, didn't have a lot of challenge for people who happened to have the same type of colorblindness I have, because we just designed in a way that it was easy for us to do so because I could check for free every single second of the day. That got built into Schell Games culture, and people started calling me to check their screens for color blindness, or sending me things on email, right? Like, check these colors. Is this palette okay? Can you tell the difference between all the elements in this user interface, for example? And that didn't cost the team any more, partly because of what Harley was talking about, that they didn't have to retrofit their game to be colorblindness friendly, right? So the dream is for everyone to be so aware of the accessibility, uh, the challenges in the whole world, and the diversity of players in the whole world, that they can, where possible, get some easy wins, maybe some free wins, maybe even some free wins, right? The new one for us is motion sickness. We don't want to make VR experiences that make anyone motion sick. Some VR experiences out there will make you motion sick. They will have like low comfort ratings in the Oculus Store or something like that. We generally are not interested in making things that make people motion sick. Maybe someday we'll make a I don't know, crazy spaceship roller coaster that turns you upside down. But at the moment, that's not what we're doing, and we consciously make all of our design decisions with that in mind. So if I jump into a headset to review another game's to playtest another game, that's built already into my hardware now, where I am checking for color blindness and I am checking for motion sickness at the same time. So as many of those things as you can, like the key for us was when you realize we can look at the whole list and go one by one with the team and say which ones of these can we achieve with the resources that we have. You don't have to get them all, but what you will find is you can get some that you didn't know existed. And that is the huge win for me. That, like, having shipped the game, knowing that after shipping, it's like, oh, this person could have played my game if only I had changed this one thing. And seeing it after it ships will break your heart. So if you can get into it early, be aware of it as early as possible, then you might be able to help people with very little effort.
Francisco and Alexis are both part of a group that we have, which is actually a grassroots group, and grew out of people just saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this. Can we talk about it?" That we call Accessibility Champions, and it is basically a group that has a very loose membership. We meet once a month, and the idea is to talk about accessibility in the industry, accessibility in the games that we're making, opportunities that we've managed to grab, opportunities that we've missed, things that we're seeing that we'd like to add to our consciousness, so that we can share the many different accessibility lenses amongst each other, so that the onus isn't always on Francisco to note that we should be paying attention to color blindness, right? But that everybody's aware, like, oh yeah, color blindness support is just a thing we can do, and it's very easy for us to do because we have actually a number of people now in the studio who can come and help. And I don't actually think we have every version of color blindness covered, but we're doing a much better job, right? That group has really helped. It helps people know who else is really interested in the topic, and it helps people know who to go to talk to about certain kinds of accessibility, either issues they've had or interests that they have, and has really helped keep it top of mind for all of us. And I'm like every month I go to it, and we just make our agenda by what people say they want to talk about, and it's always fascinating every month.
Good deal. So is there a certain anecdote, Harley, from the accessibility champions that like you went to, you're like, oh, you know what? I didn't really think about that from that group. That sticks out to you.
Yeah. The one that most recently we've talked about, I think in the last 2 meetings, is difficulty in accessibility, right? And this is, I think, a change that's going on amongst the industry as well. But the idea that rather than having, easy, medium, hard, and nightmare, that difficulty is a way of taking challenges for different types of players, whether those be accessibility challenges or just preference challenges or whatever, and say, you know what, I don't really want to do the very difficult combat, but I do want to see the story, or I want to do all of the combat, but I can't do it quite as fast, or whatever. That a way of thinking about sorting difficulty in different ways, so that there are just so that you have more options that people can turn on to tailor the game for themselves. That's been a very active conversation for us, and I know it has very much impacted the way that I'm playing games right now. For the past 5 or 10 years, ever since I had kids, I'm mostly playing games on easy because I can mostly only play after they go to bed, and I just need to get through it, right? But I felt bad about it the whole time. I felt bad about it, right? I should be playing on hard. I'm a real gamer. But but after that conversation, I realized I can let go of that. I can let go of feeling bad about it, because I'm the kind of gamer that I am right now, right? And there's no need to sort of try to put myself in a box that I don't belong in right now, especially if I'm doing all of this work to try to make sure that there are a variety of options for all the people who play the games that we make. Like, that I wouldn't take advantage of that myself seems silly, and that I wouldn't own that and feel good about it, and be grateful to the developers of the games that I'm playing, that they're giving me those options.
Yeah, and I want to say that developers are now starting to realize that if you feel bad about it, it's their fault, because of how the game itself can use its own language to refer to those modes, right? So a lot of people are going away from easy, medium, hard, and maybe going with story mode or combat mode, or avoiding having the game make you feel bad. Like, hey, you're dying a lot on optimal experience. Do you want to go into like baby mode? Like, no,
Yeah.
I do, but I don't want to feel bad about it.
Yeah, not baby mode. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, so so whenever Harley talked about easy, medium, hard, and nightmare, those were levels that we talked about for until you fall. So we changed how that wording was with until you fall, from easy, medium, hard, and nightmare to relaxed, challenging, relentless in nightmare. And what we saw whenever we took the game to different conferences, that a lot of people enjoyed, just like people were saying, feeling powerful and relaxed, because the speed wasn't there, the difficulty wasn't there, but they were still really enjoying the game. So to be able to share the different types of difficulties with different players with different tastes in games, I thought was really cool to see. So that was pretty sweet. So along with that, Matthew from YouTube has another question saying, are there any important so I'll put this out to the whole panel. I think, important could be different to different people. So are there any important accessibility features that people don't usually think about or implement?
I have a few, but I haven't yet decided if they're important universally or only to myself. I'll group them all into one section. When I do evaluations of games myself, one of the things that I evaluate for is what I call limbic stim, which is basically just saying, does it freak you out? Does it get your heart racing? Does it put you into fight or flight mode? A lot of people really enjoy going into fight or flight mode. It's a thing that that's why we have roller coasters, and that's why we have haunted houses, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, uh, but there are some people for whom it can be very distressing, right? And they can get overloaded, and where they would enjoy the mechanics of a game and the story of a game and et cetera, getting too much of that stimulation, going into fight or flight mode is a real problem for them. I think that finding ways to address that and let players sort of have a slider up and down for that is one of the things that might be coming next. It's probably not a coincidence that I'm talking about this today and still playing Last of Us Part 2, where I have all the settings set exactly as I want, but I still prefer to play with the lights on and somebody else in the living room with me. Or I might just, sometimes I just find I'm just like, oh, I'm all twisted up, right? It's a very, very creepy game, and there's a lot of jump scares, and so that it does that. But looking at VR games, the first thing that every new VR team does is put you on a high ledge and make you look down and see if they can make you have fear of heights. And for some people that's exciting, and for some people that's really, really hard. And it's the same thing, right? You go into fight or flight mode, you maybe get vertigo, etc. And so finding ways that we can help people adjust into or out of that experience if they want it, I think is an important next step in accessibility.
All right, so we have another question from the GM Redditor who says, in Celeste, the game tells you if this game is unaccessible for you because of how hard it is, you could use like this assist mode. But that doesn't prevent people from cheating when they get frustrated, which I think is part of the intended experience. Should there be prevention mechanics?
Yeah, I think the key there is that cheating, right? Like cheating only means something to you as a player. So the same action to you could be, you have your set a goal for yourself, and your goal that you may have set is, I will get through this game without any assistance, right? Someone that is having the exact same gameplay experience as you, that's going through the same game in the same way, their goal might be, I just want to get through the story of this game because I'm really enjoying the story, and the platforming is cool, but it's not my favorite part of this game. My favorite part is the story. And the developer hopes that both of those players can get what they want out of the game, right? So the game is, the game designers, in my perspective, the game designer's job is to tell you, hey, here are some tools that you have so that you can experience this game in the way that is most valuable to you to experience. Instead of making the judgment in front that says, this game can only be experienced in one way, and it is the way that I am making it so that it can only be experienced in this one way, which is the maximum challenge, right? Some people can still make games like that, and I think that has its place. But for me, it's all in the empowering the player to make their own way through the game.
Yeah, So let's take Dark Souls as an example, right? A famously difficult game that people throw themselves at again and again and again. If you think about it, the bloodstains in that game are an accessibility feature because they're there to give you a clue that something is going to happen right around here. That is the developer making a choice that rather than turn on a limiter, they're going to turn on a universal accessibility feature. I think Francisco's right. There are games that can be niche enough that you can say, no, there's only one way to play it. We're going to put on a limiter, and only people who want exactly this experience can play it. The world is a huge place now. The internet lets us reach people, etc. But the bigger the team that you need to have to make the game, the more players you need to be able to enjoy the game in order to be able to keep making games, right? And so questions about are players playing it right? I mean, there are, we can have a lot of conversations about what does cheating really mean, but if players are really enjoying their experience and they're not destroying the experience of other players, I'm almost always going to say that's fair, right? Yeah.
All right, so we have a lot of questions coming in, which is fantastic. So please keep your questions coming. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce our moderation team. So Jill, our senior director of marketing, is behind the live chat. So thank you, Jill, for talking with the folks, making sure that you get their comments and questions. Mac is our tech producer, making sure that this stream goes live. So thank you, Mac. And then Allie is also a part of the marketing team, making sure that she gets all the fantastic sound bites from the panel. So, okay, so I did that. I am sorry I forgot about that. So with that being said, Phil is good to have you back. Phil's been a regular viewer. He asks, are there any accessibility oversights in Until You Fall that you'd go back and change now? Now, again, Until You Fall is still in early access, so some things might be changing that you're not sure about. Or do you plan to take into account in the future on that title or future ones? Okay, so are there any accessibility oversights in Until You Fall that you'd like to go back and change? Or would you plan to change anything in the future on Until You Fall or future titles?
I'm sure there are oversights, and there are ones that I won't think of, and there are ones that I know I wished we had been able to get to that we weren't able to get to. The wonderful thing about Until You Fall and Schell Games in general is that we have such a really active community. We have people who are really generous with their feedback, that we've been able to manage a lot of them because somebody spoke up. So as an example, recently we were able to fix a bug that only was affecting one small group of people with a very particular hardware setup. But if nobody had spoken up, we would never have known of it because we just didn't have that very specific configuration. The nice thing about having a game that's in early access is we can take that feedback, we can roll it in, we can move forward, and certainly we would love to be able to continue doing that with the game. Specifically, some of the stuff that I would like to see, and this is not specific to Until You Fall, we've been working on a closed caption subtitle system. That's a lot harder to solve well in VR than it seems like it would be, because the most obvious implementations can make some people feel motion sick. But it's certainly something we continue to work on and to try to figure out what we could do that would support all of our VR games easily across the board.
Good stuff. So another question, we have Paul who comments and asks, we've been hearing a lot about tailoring the experience for the player, but what about competitive experiences where the playing field has to be level? Have you thought much about how to approach that?
Francisco's doing a little bit of work right now that sort of applies, but he can't talk about it because that stuff is unannounced. So,
Yeah.
um,
But I would say in general we don't make a lot of competitive. I'm thinking to the level of like online multiplayer,
Sure.
something like an Overwatch or like a League of Legends or something like that. So in terms of making an experience like that and having experience doing something in that area, or having done research there, I honestly have nothing. As a player, I can tell you, right? Like I think competitive play can exist in a somewhat different realm as casual play. What I want is to be able to join a game and not feel to join a multiplayer game somewhat late in its development stage, in its life cycle. If I've never played Overwatch before and I join today and I want to start playing from scratch, I want to have the game support that experience and help me. But I am somewhat afraid of doing it because I just feel like I'm going to let everyone down, and I know it's a team-based game, and I know that I'm going to go in, be real bad at it, and I'm going to feel like it's my fault, and then we're losing because of me. And so I would like to live in a world where the developers, and I know that there's really smart people in those teams thinking about those things really hard, and so I trust that to continue to evolve. But I unfortunately don't have much in terms of how to make it and how to do it. Don't have experience there.
I
Yeah,
don't think it's a coincidence that you're most likely to get a chicken dinner the first 3 times you play PUBG. I will
Right.
say that. Speaking to that experience you're talking about, Francisco.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, like in the sports world, there's not that much accessibility options, right? But in the video games, like looking at esports for somebody who might be, for Francisco's point earlier on, who might be colorblind, going into a arena where you have to compete and there's a bunch of different colors. How do you make sure that it's accessible to people who might have some difficulty seeing different colors, but still making it competitively level? That's a very interesting conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
And at which point does an accessibility feature turn into an advantage, right? Because I can play
Right.
Fortnite and I turn all the accessibility features on because I'm like, I want visual representation of sounds because it's
Right.
way easier than trying to figure out where people are using my ears, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they do it in competitive Fortnite, but I would imagine that that could cross the line into, is that fair? Is that cheating?
Right. Yeah. Like what is that balance?
Yeah. I think it also depends on what kind of competition you're talking about, right? There are plenty of competitive games that people play and they're nowhere near professional. They just want to go online and have a good time. And I think there's a level of acceptability there. But even in that arena, that acceptability for either accessibility or whatever, it very quickly becomes a hot button issue the better people get at the game, right? When you first go in and you play any a game like this, you're just hoping to survive long enough to figure out how your gun works or whatever, right? Like it's brutal out there. And it's really very much in developers' interest to make sure that people are ushered through that experience and don't nope out. Because if they nope out, that's less players, and that's a less vivid community that you can bring to bear. At the same time, if you're not doing that very carefully, people who get very serious about it and get very skilled aren't going to feel great about having the mastery that they've built tested against players that it should be tested against. And that happens long before you get anywhere near the pro level. I haven't worked on any games that do stuff like that for a very long time. I think it's all changed quite a bit. I know that back when I was doing it, it really was like, let's just level playing field and everybody, right? And now it is standard practice to make sure that new players get a little bit of a bump so that they have enough sense of what momentum feels like that they'll come back. So yeah, everything's changed there, and I'm sure that those systems are very deep and mature at this point.
Tough. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. So if you are watching on YouTube and you have a couple questions, please put in the live chat now, so Jill is able to look at the questions and send them to the team. But while that happens, I do have a couple more questions. So talking about our approach, so we talked about earlier about how we approach accessibility in the studio. From one of the interviews that Alexis and Harley did, we talked about how Schell Games believes that learning and fun are foundational. And I believe that was a quote from Harley. So if you want to expand a little bit more about how that pertains to accessibility, that would be great. And then Alexis, I'd like for you to kind of expand on how people could explore oneself and growing mastery in terms of accessibility. So we'll start with Harley.
Oh, sure. Let me nerd out a little bit. Here's my theory. You want to hear my theory? My theory is that we are a social primate species, and as such, the primary way that we learn is through play. And because we live in a very complicated world, and we always have lived in a very complicated world, the rules are really important, right? And so partly rules, like when children get together and they make games and play games, negotiating the rules is a very important social school, but also partly learning how to play within the rules and get right up to the edge of the rules is also a very important, usually physical skill, but sometimes social skill. There are places in this world where people think learning and fun should be separate. I do not believe that, and Schell Games does not believe that. We believe that when you are learning something, that is indeed fun, that there's a whole part of your brain that lights up, that engages, that gets really excited, because we are so deeply programmed to want knowledge, to want new skills, to learn things and prove our mastery at them, that the way to really drive a really good player engagement loop is to give them opportunities to become better at, or to become better people, or to spend their time in a way that they will really value 5 years from now. So that's basically that whole thing wrapped up in a nutshell. Is just we're just so deeply programmed for that. If we can find that part of people's brains and give them what they want, we're not just making games that they enjoy. We're not just making games that we enjoy making, that we're actively helping to make the world a better place by helping people change themselves for the better, even in an entertainment experience.
Very cool. Alexis?
Can you repeat the question again, Dwayne?
Oh, yeah. So, in one of the articles. So the articles I'm thinking about, I think Jill, you can add these links to the live chat. We had different articles on game skinny, game rant.
Tyrant.
Say it
Game
again.
Tyrant. Game Tyrant.
Game tyrant. Thank you. And there's one more that Jill will add to the live chat.
Okay.
That we all talked about, that Harley and Alexis talked about accessibility, and one thing was about how people could explore themselves, their ownership in the game experience, and growing mastery based on making the game accessible to them. I'd just like for you to just comment a little bit about that.
I mean, I guess in terms of if people are looking for ways to learn more about accessibility, I think Able Gamers is a really great resource, a nonprofit organization that exists that advocates for players with disabilities. We're just starting to partner with them to try to get some of their folks in their player panel to help us with play testing. From the VR perspective, I know that Job Simulator, Vacation Simulator, they do a good job of talking about their accessibility features. So I've read some blogs that they put out about things that they're doing. And from the conference level, I've seen the topic of accessibility come up a lot lately. Games for Change conference, which was just a few weeks ago, had quite a few topics on it. So there's a lot to learn. I'm certainly learning a lot every day. And I think my parting thought is you don't have to do everything, but if you can do something, do something.
Good stuff. Okay, so please, if you have any questions, please get them in. But now we'll just go around. We'll start with Francisco, then Harley, then Alexis, about future of games and accessibility. We will end with gaming in general. What would you like to see more in terms of accessibility? So you could do VR, non-VR, location-based, whatever is on top of your mind right now. And so we'll start with, I know, Francisco, I have started you with the harder
Always
question.
get the hard ones.
Let's switch it up.
No, it's okay.
Oh, he can take it. He can do it.
I'll take it since I'm going first. I don't have a good answer. I'll use that as a cop-out.
Okay, go ahead, Francisco.
No, I'll send an easy one for game developers who might be watching, which is pass your game content, your language content, through a reading level filter, and don't try not to have any words that are more complex than like a 5th or 6th grade reading level. All of your international players will love you for it. If you can't localize your game, people will still try to play it, and don't recreate my experience as a very young player trying to play through GoldenEye 64, going through a English dictionary, being like, "What is a mainframe and where is it?" Because I need to like deactivate the mainframe, and this level is way too large, and I don't know what it means, and I cannot play this game. Not because of anything other than I don't know what the word mainframe means. So there's an easy one that is dear to me.
That's awesome. Mine is again nerdy and theoretical. I have this theory that that basically the way that we are doing hands and the ability to interact with the world in VR is going along the same stages of development that babies and toddlers go along as they learn to interact with the world. So originally, we just had these things that we could just touch the world, but we couldn't, maybe we could knock things, but we didn't, and then we got thumbs, and that was very exciting. Right now we have thumbs And we have index fingers, and we can grip, and we can pull the trigger, and we can do things with our thumbs. And that's super exciting. So now if we're toddlers, we can pick up food and we can eat it, right? But my theory is that the way that hand development in VR is going to go is that we are going to look at the next stage of human development. And what do toddlers learn after the pincher grip? Usually it's the pencil grip, and start to be able to write in VR, have independent fingers, have force feedback on the fingers. So I'm very excited for all of that. And that's one of those that I love, because it opens up accessibility in a way to everybody, but also opens up specific features for people who may have mobility challenges that I think it'll make it much easier for us to address. And then to your point, Francisco, about the controllers, once people are using their hands and we're able to let them configure them to the way their hands actually work, I think that is going to be really a game changer across the board when we're done with controllers.
I'm with Harley. No more controllers. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's exciting to see. There's certainly prototypes out there for those advances that are exciting.
Good stuff. Well, thank you guys for taking time out of your evening to talk about accessibility in games, in the game industry. Thank you, everybody, for watching the stream and asking these very insightful questions. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel for future videos, please make sure you do so. Our next Dinner with the Devs will be the last Wednesday in August, talking about another one of our experiences. Feel free to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram for Until You Fall, and go to our website, Schell.Games, and you can sign up for our newsletter so you can get all types of information about the virtual events and where people are speaking and what's going on with our games and experiences. So Harley, Alexis, Francisco, thank you. Mac, Jill, Allie, thank you for your help, and we will see you next month. Take care.
Well,
Thank you.
see ya.